This is my 8th year at Comic-Con, in an official capacity at IDW, and I got to say one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my time at IDW is work on Locke and Key, and that's entirely due to the two gents sitting next to me. So let me introduce Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. And now I want this to be a good, lively discussion here. So in addition to the stuff I'll talk about, I want everybody to have time to ask questions. This is probably the last time Joe and Gabe will sit on a panel together until Omega wraps. So let's talk about what's come before, what's coming up. To get things started, I just sort of ran through where we've been. So we started with Welcome to Lovecraft. You all know this, by the way. We went through Head Games, Crown of Shadows, Keys of the Kingdom, and the new book, which is in our booth this weekend, is Clockworks. So now, this leads us to, not quite Omega. And I know I get a lot of people going, enough, bring me Omega, like enough stalling. We're going to stall a little bit longer with a one-shot called Grindhouse. So I thought we'd start things off before getting into Omega and really where we're headed with the final storyline. Just talking about this fun one-shot and, what you're doing with it and, how you saw this book.
For me, when I was a teenager, there were 2 or 3 comics that I really emotionally connected with, and that, I was like a crack addict for. And a big one was Sandman. Probably like just about everyone else here. And one thing that Gabe and I have always wanted to do is a book of one-shots that use the keys the way dreams are sometimes used in Sandman to tell individual standalone stories. I like that kind of thing. I love the X-Files, and I'm a guy who always thought the single monster stories were the best episodes of the X-Files. So Gabe and I started playing around with one-shots, and the first one we did was called Open the Moon, and was in the Guide to the Known Keys.
The Eisner-nominated Guide to the Known Keys, we should point out.
And what was great about that was we had a chance to bust out of our usual box and do some completely different things. We sort of did a little Nemo in Slumberland tribute, and
the Bill Watterson tribute in Sparrow.
Yep. So that was kind of, for us, that was a discovery. We tried that and we thought, wow, this is great. We got to do more of this. And so we had this idea for another story called Grindhouse, which is kind of like the polar opposite of Open the Moon. I don't think there'll be an Eisner nomination for Grindhouse.
I think a way to describe it is Open the Moon was who you want to be, and Grindhouse is who you are.
Maybe. So Grindhouse is a chance to do kind of like a crime comic from the 50s. And Gabe had a chance to experiment with a different style, and I think when people look at it, you look at the first couple pages and it's hard to believe it's Gabe,
So we've got some up on the screen now, in fact.
Yeah. It's a heartwarming story about in the center page you can see this is about 3 friendly gentlemen who have money that they want to share with the homeless and orphan children.
Yeah.
And they're on their way to the orphanage.
Yeah.
And then on that other panel where there seems to be a woman falling out of her shirt.
Yeah. He tries to hold her so she couldn't fall, but
he was trying to catch her.
Yeah.
And she fell.
Yeah.
So
Poor guy.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a chunk of Grindhouse. How do you feel about shifting styles anyway?
It's for me, it's incredibly fun, and this particular issue also was a great chance for me to pay some modest homage to some of my favorite classic authors, like Milton Caniff and Alex Toth and people like that, who really crafted a way of doing intense art and storytelling that I really love and admire a lot. So for me, it was a great creative exercise. Try to stand on their foot and create something for Locke and Key. And what's another thing I wanted to comment about Grindhouse is that it's another exploration of something that in a way appears as as an extra result of the natural process in which we were working in Locke and Key. When we started with this story, we started developing the mythology and the world around these characters. And I remember when it came it was in the Head Games collection that when we, for the first time, we had the guide to the known keys at the back of the book. So at that point, we started playing around with the idea how to make this description of every known key funny. Then Joe came with the idea of writing a small story around each one of these keys, and it began to develop a parallel story to the one we were talking in the comics. So we started developing the story of generations of locks into the presentation of the keys that has become the place, and we're playing right now with our one-shots like Grindhouse or Open the Moon. So it's been a way to explore a more complex and depth universe through this growth of the comic itself.
There are one-shots as well within the overarching, story of Tyler and Kinsey and Bodhi and Dodge. I think about the Revolutionary War story from the beginning of Clockworks as being sort of a standalone.
Yeah, or Intermission, the story of.
The Joe Ridgway story was also kind of a standalone. And one thing that Gabe and I have talked. Well, I want to say about Grindhouse and his style. The way he changed his styles. We talked a lot about what makes a crime comic work. What is the essential component of a dirty crime comic from the 50s and 60s? And what we decided was it's all about teeth.
Yeah.
If you look at the crime comics of the 50s, everyone is kind of
grinning.
Yeah.
Clenching.
There's a lot of whether they're smacking someone or shooting someone or or turning on TV. They're kind of. So I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, when you have a story that runs over a course of years, whether it's something like Lost or something like The X-Files or, whether it's a TV show or a comic, I think that you tend to get into trouble when you begin raising mysteries that you don't have solutions for. You have a big reveal, a big amazing shock. You turn the page and everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" But you can only pile on so much of "Oh my God, it's amazing" before readers start to go, "How'd all this shit happen?"
Yeah.
Why are things the way they are? And then you better come up with answers. And if it's not good, I think readers or an audience tends to feel betrayed. I haven't seen the last few episodes. I thought they were doing a good job up till season 4. No. Oh well. Well, with the X-Files, which is the example I always go back to because it's been off the air a long time, you can't hurt anyone's feelings, is, they piled on mystery on top of mystery on top of mystery until there was never any hope of what the audience wanted, which was satisfying emotional resolution for Mulder and Scully. It became all about plot, and the plot wasn't that interesting. It was just this tangle of conspiracies on top of conspiracies. So when Gabe and I got about 5 issues into Locke and Key, I began to feel like we better know our shit.
Yeah.
So we went back through and we essentially worked out a 20-page Bible for everything that's happened in Key House since the first time the Black Door opened. And I'd say, in a very real way, the only thing that we don't know is how it all ends. We have some ideas, but, whatever happens, and, if they all get croaked in the first issue of Omega, so be it. I think isn't it better if the creators play fair and some people get hurt than if the creators cheat and you feel like it was a waste of time, So I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a long ride. This work with Locke and Key. Joe just mentioned that when we were starting working in Head Games, we made this Bible in which we basically studied the origin of the keys and also most of Randall Locke's story. So last year, for example, was really fun and rewarding for us working exactly on that story in Clockworks, in which we have all this plot figured out years before, waiting for the right moment to tell it. So I think one of the most gripping things for us as creators with this story is that everything seems to be developing in the right way. I'm incredibly thankful of the people of IDW for their support they have given us during all these years, even creating an own way to publish the story. That's not the usual way to publish a regular series in comics. So I think this is a common effort that's finally reaching its ending, and we're very aware that we have a great responsibility of ending it in the best possible way. We're playing constantly with ideas to make it as fun, as rewarding as possible, and that's the commitment we have. So the challenge is set.
And one more point to make about the one shot before we move on to Omega is the first one was the Guide to Known Keys. So in the back, after the story, we had the Guide to the Keys. In this book, Grindhouse, now there will be the Guide to Key House. So anybody who's seen the hardcovers, you get the schematics that Gabe has designed for the different levels of the house. Now in this Guide to Key House in the back of Grindhouse, you can essentially take this comic and you'll need a plot of land and a lot of materials, but you'll be able to build your own key house.
And Gabe is an architect by training, and he sent me diagrams of where everyone's room is. And the first time I ever looked at him was when we were preparing for this comic, because I just let it go away and I just write stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, Tyler looks into the backyard and Tyler's room is in the front of the house, and I just figured Gabe will fix it and stuff, and so his hours of sweat just disappeared into some email.
The house ended up developing very interesting corners thanks to your writing.
Well,
these narrow, elongated rooms with a window at the
I will say, in the middle of working on this book, you did stop being an architect, right? And I think it was because of all these problems that Joe created for you. You're like, I can't pay attention to real architecture
an existential
anymore.
crisis due to the.
He did. There are two things that I managed to do to upset Gabe, and of which I'm
Only
tremendously
two?
proud.
Yeah.
Only two.
Come on, man.
Which two are you thinking?
The recently.
Take your countdown.
The first was when I started to ask him to draw. Like, I'm like, okay, in this room there's a dozen mason jars, and and there's nothing Gabe likes more than drawing a dozen mason jars with a little scene happening in each one. It takes me 2 minutes to write it. It takes him like all day to draw it. And so there was that. But the other thing is, in one story, I'm like, okay, Nina walks into the house off the kitchen, and he said, kept writing me saying, "There's no bathroom off the kitchen." I was like, yeah, but I mean, she's but the bathroom, we got to put a bathroom there, and he's like, there's no bathroom off the kitchen, and anyway, now there's a bathroom off the kitchen.
There's a bathroom on the kitchen.
All right, so let's talk about Omega. And as we are, I have just a little film strip that sort of runs through various things where we've been, and actually, no, film strip's coming up. That's just a look at some of the keys that Skeleton Crew Studios has made.
Yeah.
And actually on Omega, we're going to be doing photo covers on every one of the issues just to show off, the wonderful keys that Izzy's made.
Yeah.
That all needs to be said there, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right, so here we are on Omega. So Omega is the first one of the series that's now going to be 7 issues. And I assume there's a good reason for, going beyond the normal 6 here.
The tough thing is figuring out what we're going to do with the other 6, because we took out Tyler and Kinsey in the first issue of Omega, and I don't even know where to go, with those other 6 issues.
Yeah. After Body eats them, it's I don't know. Maybe he can take a nap for 6 issues to digest them.
I do see Bodhi with his belly bloated.
Yeah. Picking his teeth with the hook from Tyler's cap.
I do believe in Joss Whedon rules. I do think that the reader has to understand that no one is safe, that they have to understand in their heart that you are willing to pull the trigger even on, a favorite character, even on the heroes, and that's kind of been that's kind of been a guiding principle for me since I first started publishing was, for me, stories work when characters do what they would really do. If, they don't split up when they're in the old scary house, they leave. Then if the ghost follows them, it's scary. There's always a way to ramp up the tension and still keep it believable. Yeah. What you hate is when characters do obviously stupid things or do things out of character and survive and I prefer for characters to do exactly what they do and die if that's what happens, and hopefully Tyler and Kinsey and Bodhi are brave enough to pull through, but if that doesn't happen, then then we have a sadder ending than expected.
Yeah, we already have a couple of boxes to keep the hate mail after, to keep it organized.
We do have some ideas. We do have some ideas about where it's all going. We do have a pretty strong idea about the final 2 issues, and we've already done issue 1 has been written, and Gabe's just starting to draw it. We know what happens. So it's all kind of framed out. The biggest question is who lives and who dies.
Which is probably not something we're
And
going to
what
answer
happens
today.
with the bad guy. Now, one of the most interesting things for this project for me when we started working in Locke and Key was that in the first conversations with Joe, we both agreed that we wanted to make a story with an ending. We planned this despite of how long it could be. We're going to have a beginning, middle, and ending part of the story. And so far, it has flowed in that direction pretty naturally. So it's great in a way certainly it's going to be sad when it's over, but in a way it's great to be finally in this final part for which we've been working for 4.5 years already. So
yeah,
it's great to be here. Right
Closure matters.
Yeah.
And as we've been moving closer to Omega, and people know that this is coming, and this is the final issue in the storyline, we'll get to Q&A, but one of the questions that I'm sure somebody would ask, and I get asked a lot, is, so is that it? Is that the end of Locke and Key? Is that the last thing we'll see? And I probably discussed whether that's the case or not.
We do have these 2 one-shots now. We have Open the Moon and Grindhouse, and Gabe and I have talked about it, and we have about 5 other standalone stories that we'd like to tell. So after Omega, there will be a 7th book that'll be called Locke and Key: The Golden Age. And the Golden Age will not be about Kinsey, Tyler, Bodie, and Dodge, but it will be about Key House, which has 250 years of history, and there are a lot of stories there to tell, and a lot more keys that we haven't got into. And I think people like that. I think people like, a simple story that stands on its own feet and tells something neat and enclosed. So we'll have that to follow Omega, and so there will be a little more story there.
I mean, I'm biased, but I've also read a lot of comics, and a lot of comics that are set up to have an ending. There really is nowhere to go with them. So when they do continue it, it's sometimes, it's a bit contrived. Because you guys have developed such a backstory and so many hundreds of years now that feed into Key House, there's so much that can be done here that I think there's a lot more stories to tell, even though this particular chapter is going to close.
Yeah. As far as generational mythology, after all, so one of the funniest things we did in Clockworks was to explore this revolutionary era story with Ben Locke and his family, and to explore the origins of the keys. And with Joe, we discovered that there's a whole universe in each one of these moments of the different generations of the family. Same thing with what happened with Open the Moon. We started working with these locks from 1912, and we both immediately fell in love with this Chamberlain Locke character, which is incredibly lovely and fun to work with. So there's room for more locks, and as we see in the Open the Moon itself, in the part of the story in which all the ancestors of Ian Locke get up the ladder, and
they all have stories.
There's stories for all of them.
The one, I don't know when we'll get to it. It might not be for years. At some point, Gabe and I would like to write a story called Locke and Key: Battleground, which would be set during World War II and has a character who's sometimes mentioned in the back of, in the Guide to the Known Keys, named Hans Riffel. And we also heard briefly about the Riffel rule, which it has to do with a key that he created that we haven't talked too much about, that prevents adults from seeing magic the way kids can see it. But I would love to tell the story of Battleground at some point. I think I've got the whole thing figured out in my head. I like the characters. It's got a great tragic love story. I mean, it's got everything except Celine fucking Dion. Like my heart will go on and on. So that would be fun, but I don't know when. One thing at a time.
And so, as we're moving forward toward the end of this thing, I think throughout the next year, it's going to be, as much as building toward the end, it's also going to be a celebration of just Locke and Key in general. Yesterday, we presented murder weapons to Joe and Gabe to celebrate the fact that they've hit the plateau of a gold record equivalent in comic sales on Locke and Key, which for a book, that started out humbly and an independent title in this climate, to sell 500,000 copies is quite something. And
quite a story.
It's really nice when your boss brings you a hatchet.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, you got to wonder what the underlying message is there. It's like, that's nice. They gave Locke and Key the axe. Everyone's going to love that. Right before Omega.
Keep the deadlines was printed on the handle.
Yeah. As long as celebrating along those lines, I also want to take a moment and just show you something I'm really proud to see, and that is, we all know how great Gabe is.
Oh.
But now, a lot more people are finding out. Gabe has his first gallery show and exhibit down in Chile right now, and it just opened about a week ago. Woo! I'm just really proud of what he's done. I mean, it is visuals like no other in comics, and so this is just some scenes from the exhibit that's currently running for about another 5 weeks.
Yeah.
He's got, the art is blown up to giant banner size, scrolling down the walls, and it's a terrific way to look at it.
All right, so let's give you guys a chance at this. Anybody have any questions for us? And as we're doing this, I also opened the floor to people on Twitter because I wanted them to have a chance to ask questions too. So I'll sort of intersperse them with yours. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, I thought when you talked about characters doing things that are obviously stupid, I know what you meant, but I like the fact that, especially in Clockwork, you see teenagers being teenagers.
Yeah.
Which doing really retarded. Rendell's idea is really idiotic. So
yeah, but he's in love.
How thinks that it's not the reason why he's doing it. I thought that was really interesting. That there's these blurred lines of what they're saying, what they're clearly doing that you don't often see in comic books. You do see it in prose literature, but I was wondering how you walk the line of showing those motivations. That's hard to do with teenagers, especially because they're so hard.
In the case of the story in Clockworks, Gabe and I had a lot of time to talk about what happened back in the 80s and how Dodge, became this this unstoppable sociopath.
Yeah.
And and the tragedy at the heart of Locke and Key is that Lucas Caravaggio is a terrific person, a terrific, loving, decent guy. So we thought about what would lead these good kids to make a disastrous choice like this, and it actually wasn't that hard, because who hasn't wanted to be popular? Who hasn't wanted to be glamorous? When you're 17, the idea of being loved by all your peers is everything. It's a huge driving force.
And
so
the temptation of taking shortcuts and cheating on yourself or on your environment. I think one of the most interesting things for me of this story is that, in a way, it presents teenagers as failed people, as people that makes mistakes constantly, but with the dignity of trying to be as honest as possible. I'm a huge retractor of the effect of the public image of teenagers that made movies like American Pie or stuff like this, because it's just like a simplification of a phenomenon that's much more complex. It's very tragic to be a suffering teenager, and part of the process of becoming an adult is to overcome all those tragedies and accept your failures and limitations. And I think that's one of the most interesting topics that this story is getting on board, because the other thing that I think is very interesting is that you can have these magic keys, but if you make stupid things, you end to stupid results anyway. So it's not about having or not having a magic tool. It all depends on what decisions to make with the chances you get. So I think that's part of the heart of Locke and Key, and we're both very into that line of exploration with the story and characters.
Keys don't kill people. Gabriel Rodriguez kills people.
Yeah.
I had a question for Gabriel. I wasn't surprised to hear earlier in the panel that you were an architect, because I think that your work is unlike anything else in comics. The sense of space that you put in all your panels. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about other parts of your career and how you got involved in this project.
Oh well, I'll try to be as short as possible, because it's a very weird way to get into a project like this one. in Chile, we don't have right now a formal comic industry. It was one in the late 50s and early 60s that was very successful, but then it declined and practically disappeared. I've been in love of comic books since I was a very, very small kid. My dad used to buy us lots of books, and many of them were comic books, and I immediately get in love with the medium. So I started drawing since when I remember. My first memory of myself was me sitting in my bedroom drawing. And then it came the time as I grew up, I always developed this idea of maybe one day I'll have time during my work to make one comic book and publish it and try to fulfill that part of my interests. So when I was studying architecture, I take the determination of making one last try of making something. I tried to make up a project in Chile that failed, but after that I got the chance to get in contact with a guy that had another contact via email. And he told me, well, there's this independent company in the US, IDW, that's trying to find people to make a comic adaptation of CSI. And I say, well, okay. I started sending samples and became a part of the casting process of the artist, and ended up getting the job. And that was pretty weird. And that's also one of the reasons why I get into this business in a relatively old age. And my first professional comic I did was when I was 26, which is the age in which a regular comic artist in the US is a veteran. So I kept working.
They actually shoot most comic artists at the age of 31. No good anymore.
So I started working with the IDW. We did this run of the CSI comics, and then we did the adaptation of Land of the Dead and the Clive Barker novel, The Great and Secret Show. And after all that process, then one day I received an email from Chris Ryall, who told me, well, there's this guy, Joe Hill, who wrote these amazing short stories and have an idea for a comic book called Locke and Key. And they sent me the pitch. The first contact I think I had with Joe was that he sent me 2 pages. One of these with a short 2-paragraph description of the basic plot and idea of Locke and Key, and another in which we had the 6 main characters of Welcome to Lovecraft with a 3-line description, and something like a sort of a challenge in which he told me, okay, let's see what you can do with this. And I came up with the design of Tyler Kinsey and Buddy Locke and sent them to him, and we immediately clicked. And from then on, it's been, well, we're here finally.
Well, can I, from my side, how Gabe got the job, and it's the same way he got the job. Every job, really, but especially the last 2, the Great and Secret Show job, and then this one is. You ever play the game Old Maid when you were a kid? You know the whole point is to try and get somebody to pick the Old Maid card. So when I was meeting with Clive Barker, I brought Gabe samples, and I brought 4 other shitty samples because I knew there was no one better that could do that job. And same with Joe, when Locke and Key came up, I knew there was nobody in this business that I was, in contact with or even thought about that could do the job better than Gabe. So I don't even think I gave you anybody worth a damn other than Gabe because... Well,
when I looked at Gabe, what I liked was the emotion in his characters' faces and the light in their eyes, because a lot of people think that horror succeeds based on flying guts and and spreading gore around. Nothing wrong with that. I like entrails as much as the next guy. But you have to care about characters before you can ever be afraid. You're not frightened about what will happen to, when you go see Nightmare on Elm Street, everyone is rooting for Freddy Krueger because the teenagers are they're just 10 pins to get knocked down. You got the jock, you got the slut, you got the, genius, you got, the geek. Yeah, and so what the only point of interest in those films is the inventive ways that they get slaughtered. And to me, that's a failure. That's bad horror. That's not, when horror succeeds, it's because you have some people you really love, and then you have to see them facing the worst. And I knew that Gabe could make people care. One
of the toughest decision for me to make when I was starting designing the visual aspects of Locke and Key, and I get back to your architectural question, is that my first reaction when I read the stuff was to move away as far as possible to traditional American comic book looking art, because the the first image that I got in my mind when I started reading the first script was images from Chihiro's Journey from Hayao Miyazaki. And I immediately got that was the appeal that I wanted for the visual aspects from Locke and Key. So taking a little bit of that, and also a lot of influence from lots of European artists that I used to read when I was younger, I decided to build the visual aspects of Locke and Key about that. So based on that, I took two decisions. One was to make the characters as expressive as possible, in spite of sacrificing the realistic appearance of them, but because I want them to feel realistic emotionally. So I decided to go in this little caricaturesque way to design them, but to make a counterpart to that, to create an as realistic as possible environment for them. So I took a lot of care in the design of the buildings and the space. When you create a realistic sense of space, there's no need for the characters to look realistic to feel that their world is believable. So that was the effort. And the other thing was that I knew that as long as the story kept developing, there was going to be a process in which the character will be discovering their adultness, especially Tyler and Kizzy. So I decided to go with this much more exaggerated style at the beginning, because I wanted to gradually turn it into a more contained and realistic way of looking at the characters in the latest books. So if you compare, I don't know, the artwork from Clockworks with Welcome to Lovecraft, I try to keep a sense of consistency between the both of them, but also to be able to notice that process too.
The kids grow into their own faces like kids do.
Yeah.
You know, but I also felt like, you know, yeah, I've seen so much of Gabe's stuff. You know, Gabe can draw anatomy with the best of them, you know, but I think for both of us, what we care the most about is psychological anatomy,
Yeah.
you know, making sure that the characters seem like whole people emotionally. So
Yeah, you nailed the emotional expressiveness of it, because when I read Welcome to Lovecraft, I put it down, I was like, I'm not going to read this anymore. It tore my guts out. And a friend like really encouraged me to keep going. I'm so glad I did.
Well, thank you. No, thanks to you.
All right, how about a question from Twitter? At Corpse Bride asks, when are we getting Locke and Key action figures complete with Key House playset? That is vastly overdue, isn't it? I'm hoping there's at least one toy maker in the room that can make this happen, because that's certainly something I want to see.
We would love to.
yeah, that would be pretty great.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I have the schematics and the 3D model, so if they need reference.
what would be really cool?
Just ask.
You know, it'd be really cool. Remember the old Darth Vader head that you had the action figures in? You know, you could carry Darth Vader's head. What would be really cool is to have like a phrenology version of Bodhi's head, and you could unscrew the lid of his head. You know, maybe it would even have the head key as a locking mechanism, so people can't take your action figures. Because I hate when people do that. You know, so you'd unlock his head and then you'd unscrew it. Inside, you could have all the action figures and stuff, and a toy dinosaur and everything. Be really that'd be like hot.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about releasing the 20-page Bible onto
Because some things, it's best for some things to be secret, but also in some cases we
But in
have.
a way, it's here.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. In some ways, the Bible's and Clockworks. You know, we most of the important facts, like where the keys come from, why Dodge is bad, that's all in Clockworks. We didn't have to tell it because we showed it. The thing about the Bible is a lot of times it has simple summaries of what happens into a certain character at a certain time. But I would never just dump that on a reader. I would much rather, you know, do a comic book about it and tell a story as opposed to just present a summary. So I guess, you know, the Bible is useful for us, but I think for the average reader it's probably a little too inside baseball.
Yeah, over there.
Where did the story begin for you? I mean, there's so many compelling images that are there on the page, but what was the first thing that was in your mind as creators that said, aha, this is the direction I want to go. This is the story I want to tell.
For me, Locke and Key came about as a result of failure, long, prolonged failure. I had written 4 novels that I couldn't get off the ground, that I couldn't sell to anyone, and and that was pretty dismaying. I mean, I spent 3 years on one of them and couldn't sell it anywhere. I had managed to have some success with short stories. And a talent scout at Marvel Comics read one of my short stories in a prize collection and said, "We'd love to have you try writing about superheroes for us." So I wound up being recruited to Marvel through their talent scout program at a time period when they were bringing in a lot of people from other fields, short story writers, playwrights, and so on. Jason Aaron came in through the same program. And in some ways, they've kept it alive. Scott Snyder, actually, his first 11-page Fire Guy. Human Torch. Yeah, Human Torch, right? Yeah, the Fire Guy. He did an 11-page Human Torch story.
I can see why they asked you to write superheroes for them.
Yeah, they love my story about Big Green Angry Guy. So I did do an 11-page Spider-Man story for Marvel. That was fucking terrible, but it was saved somewhat by the art of Seth Fisher. The late Seth Fisher drew it and did a great job with it. And I had always had a comic book imagination. I had always read comic books. The first writers I connected to that I wasn't related to by blood were guys like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore, who wrote for comics, Chris Claremont. So the hooks were in me, and I wanted to do more, and I worked up some pitches. I remember one of them was about Baby Hulk, because at the time I had a 2-year-old, and I was thinking, what if a 2-year-old got soaked in gamma radiation and then started hulking out every time it had a tantrum? What a recipe for... Sounds funny, but almost any concept that makes you laugh has like the seeds of tragedy in it. Is like, everything you need for a really great story. So I remember I pitched that, and that was a big no, and I had an idea for a story about a haunted house in which there were a series of magical keys, and I pitched that, and that was turned down. And I wound up pitching that to several places. Everyone passed on it, but it sat in the back of my mind. And I would be driving back from the drugstore at 1 a.m. with diapers or something like that, and I'd be thinking about a new key. And so it continued to grow. After my first book came out, it was a book of short stories that was published in England by a small press. IDW saw some good reviews of it. Ted Adams and Chris read the stories. They got in touch with me about adapting some of them because they were adapting short stories. At that time, they had done some of Cory Doctorow's stories. And I said, wait, I got something even better than that. I got this short story about this haunted house. Here's the pitch, and I'll tell the whole story in 6 issues. And
cut to 4.5 years later.
Yeah, 4.5 years later, and
we can't even tell the conclusion in 6 issues.
I'm almost done.
We're talking about this issue.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's how it got started.
All right, at Getty Lee asks, how could the writer of Locke and Key not respect and appreciate the talents of an amazing prog rock band who even has a song called Locke and Key?
Because nobody's perfect. We still love you, Joe.
I felt for a long time that Nickelback is Canada's apology for Rush.
At Getty Lee also wrote, seriously, Nickelback?
It's true that I dump on Rush a lot for being a bad rock band, and I shouldn't because they've never actually written a rock song in their life and probably couldn't. I actually did a short story called In the Tall Grass with my dad that's out in Esquire now, and that story is really about the perils of listening to too much Rush when you're on a road trip.
The only thing I'm going to say about this is that I work listening music all the time, so I sit from 8 to 14 hours a day listening music while I was drawing. And what I have to say to you is that without Rush music, there would be no Locke and Key. And you'll have to live with that.
I think we just got our next dedication. 15 minutes. All right, yeah.
I love how you turn Locke and Key to a game, and you have the other keys that you can buy. Is there any chance of other things like a role-playing game, possibly, or other materials as well?
I want to 8-bit game so bad. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great to have Tyler? I see him in like this little beige outfit, running through the house with a green hat on, and like he'd collect keys just like in the old adventure and stuff, and like leap boxes because of course obviously the house is full of boxes that you need to leap over, and
Boxes with mason jars inside.
Yeah, and
smash them all.
He'd descend down into the caves and stuff like that. I think that would be, smoking.
I certainly think it lends itself to a lot of different things. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to entertain those things.
Yeah, we're actually starting a line of Lock and Key underpants, Lock and Key fundaroos.
We're
so
going to model them after the panel.
All right, so we have only a few more minutes left, and I still want to get some more questions. A lot of the Twitter questions I got were also, what's Joe doing next and what's going on with Joe's current project. So you might have seen a little bit of news about Horns this week, but let's talk about Horns quickly.
Well, so Horns was my second novel, and it's a book about a man who goes out drinking one night and next morning wakes up with a hangover and a pair of horns growing from his temples. I've had a couple like that. And it turns out that with these horns comes a dark power. People feel compelled to confess their darkest secrets to the lead character, to Ig, and they want to tell him about their sins, and then they want to ask permission to do worse. And so it's a pretty dark story, but it's also a love story. It's about first love, and it's about lost love. Ig, at the time he sprouts horns, is suspected of murdering his love, his longtime love, Marin. And even though he's never been formally charged with the crime, in the court of public opinion, he's always been guilty. And Mandalay Pictures optioned Horns just as it was coming to press. They thought the story was exciting, and they wanted to play around with it. They hired Keith Bunin, who writes a cable show called In Treatment, and Keith stepped up and put together a great script. And then something amazing happened. Then Daniel Radcliffe read it and decided that he wanted to star in it. So I'm. As a guy who loves the Harry Potter stories, and Locke and Key in many ways has always been kind of a response to the Harry Potter stories. I find that tremendously exciting, and I also believe that Daniel Radcliffe's best work isn't behind him but ahead of him, and I base that on Woman in Black, which was my favorite film of the year. I thought it was scary and intense, and that he anchored the thing beautifully. So I'm very excited about him stepping into the part, and I think as the rest of the cast fills out, people are gonna like the guys they've got stepping into the other parts. Unfortunately, I don't have permission to talk about anything else until people sign, so I can't say anything, and I can't explain why Daniel Radcliffe decided he wanted to do the story. I heard a rumor it's because he can't wait to get naked and ride the shopping cart down the hill, which is a key scene. Which is a key scene. So if you get full frontal Dan, thank me. So Alexandra Aja is directing, and he knows how to do beautiful poetic horror films, and so I feel like we're in good hands. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. It'll be filming this fall.
And then as far as what's coming up next...
So my next novel is a book called Nosferatu, and it's about that's the license plate on the bad guy's car. It's a story about a bad man with a bad car, and it's big. It's actually about as big as my first two novels put together, it's the story of a guy named Charlie Manx who has a 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith, and he takes kids for rides in it. And when he lets them out, they're not the same anymore. And he lets them out in a place called Christmas Land. And Christmas Land is not a good place to visit. So that's the next book, and that'll be out in April. And actually it's going to be loaded with Gabriel Rodriguez art. So there'll be, so there'll be
Some bonus.
he'll have his hand in.
So you guys want to see a piece of Gabriel Rodriguez art related to this book and a special announcement to go with it?
Yeah. So it's a big book. It's a big book, but there's a lot of story there, and there's going to be a comic book series that goes alongside it called Wraith. And it will tell a separate story, not in Nosferatu, but it will feature Christmas Land and Charlie Manx and the Wraith, and will tell a story that runs alongside it, and that's the cover of the first one. He seems like a nice guy.
You know how kids always leave handprints on car windows anyway,
Yeah.
right? It's nothing to worry about.
So someone had a Jello and got a little crazy.
All right, and we still do have a few more minutes, so if there's more questions, we're happy to,
Was there anything to see the Locke and Key pilot?
That was actually one of the, about
Right.
10 of the Twitter questions.
So the Locke and Key pilot will be on BitTorrent later this afternoon. No, I mean, the Locke and Key pilot was a great piece of work. And I say that totally unbiased. But Mark Romanek did a great job with it, and it had a great cast, and it wound up looking great. Unfortunately, Fox didn't feel as passionately about it as we did, and they passed on it. And there's no show. It's not happening.
That said, they were good enough to let us show the pilot. They never let failed pilots or unpicked up pilots be seen anywhere. I mean, they never want to admit that
they were very kind to
it didn't work, or they don't want the groundswell of people to be like, that show was great, you guys really screwed up. So the fact that they let us show it at a couple cons was pretty landmark for them, but I think that's done.
And you never know what's going to happen. Locke and Key has always had kind of a life a little bit like Dodge in that, you think she's gone and then she's there again. So, so we may catch a little luck there before we're done. We'll see.
Yes.
Okay, so it is sort of hinted at how people get in the well. But I'm curious. You see, hopefully everyone's caught up. You see a Dodge in a jar with the key.
Right.
Is it just a drop in the well? I'm just the.
Right. Okay. Sometimes I do get questions about this, and it has to do with the way we've told the story, where all the information is there, but it's kind of like a puzzle that's been dumped on the table, and all the pieces are scattered around. So that's a thought version of Dodge. Dodge has reached into her own head and taken out this tainted thought.
It's one of Dodge's memories.
Yeah, that's gone in there, and then eventually winds up 25 years later, winds up in Ellie Whedon's head. There's a story where she's reaching for, I can't remember what it was. It was like pills or something in the wall, and it falls down. It was, I don't know.
Flashlight.
Flashlight. I think it was, electrical device of some sort, which falls down behind the wall, and when she reaches behind
it was an electric toothbrush.
So she pulls this out, and this thought is in her, and she's so shocked, she drops it, she slips, she's knocked unconscious, and the thing goes right into her ear, and gradually drives her to return to the well house. And when she uses the well house key and says Dodge's name, he is returned from the dead. She returns from the dead, but not exactly as she was when she died, because she has the powers of any of the specters in the well house, the power to speak through echoes and to see things through water, and so then this version of Dodge that's an echo of the old Dodge begins plotting her escape, and that's where we are when issue 1 of Welcome to Lovecraft starts.
Yeah, you.
Are you ever going to address the sort of specialness of Ellie Whedon's son? I can't remember his name, but like how
Rufus.
How the head key can't be used on him, and how, I don't know if this was all in his head,
but like how the soldiers appeared to be real.
Yeah, well, Rufus's toys talk to him. It's real to him. As for whether Rufus is done in the story, I don't think so. Yeah, I think Rufus will be back.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here in blue.
At least a while ago, your dad used to be known for the cameos in the movie adaptation of his book, so I was wondering if you're doing
They haven't asked me.
Yeah.
So, but I'll pop by and, maybe they'll stick me in somewhere.
Where's my stand-in for the naked cart scene?
I could be Radcliffe's new body double.
Please, guy, don't mention those things. I think in images. So please.
We probably have time for one or two more. Oh yeah, you over here.
There's a lot of talk about independence and what that means, and that's great when you're smuggling it, but it's so nice to know that there's somebody out there getting really great people published, getting the right talent in the right spot, especially as a huge podcast. And I just really thank you for the work and allowing me to get out.
Oh, I appreciate that right back. We wouldn't be able to do that sort of thing without you guys supporting it. So, I appreciate you all right back.
As a little outfit, I think that IDW has always tried to look for ways to survive by supporting quality, and that they've picked a lot of great projects, and a lot of times they pick projects which maybe don't don't make a ton, like Fishtown, or whatever, but they were good books, and you guys did them. And
Little Outfit, that's number 3, I should mention, but
not so little
But you're
anymore.
right. Things like Fishtown, books that we know aren't necessarily going to make money or be a big appeal to the direct market that wants their superheroes. It's very important to us to do things that we like more than anything. So you do things that keep the company going. You pay your bills, which allow you to then take chances on smaller things or interesting things, which is what gets us excited every day.
I do think, and I'm not just saying this because of my publisher. I do think that the best book on stands right now is Darwin Cook's Parker. I just love Darwin Cook's Parker. I love those, and that's an IDW book. So,
All right. Yeah, probably the last question.
Just wondering, there's other quite little lyrics and stuff in the first few volumes. Wondering, how much the art plays into the storyline, you see something like the ideal and way.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I got that.
How does the art make the story
I've always felt since early on that I've learned as much about the characters from the way Gabe draws them as anything Gabe has ever heard from me about them from what I've written about them. So, and also I've always worked along the lines of thinking like, well, what would I love to see Gabe draw, and usually it's just more mason jars, but now and then, I think like, for me, the first time I felt completely at ease as a comic book writer was in Crown of Shadows. It took me the first 6 issues to sort of get into my comfort zone, and I felt really at ease in Crown of Shadows. And for me, what I loved best was when Tyler popped the door and steps out, and he's a giant, and there's this this huge silent battle between him and the giant Shadow Wolf. And I wrote that because I wanted to see Gabe draw it. I thought it would just be a great spectacle and fun. I wanted it, and so I assumed maybe readers would want it too.
A lot of great books are a great script and a good artist paired together doing their thing. I think this has become a thing where, if you talk to Joe and Gabe together for any amount of time, they're like a married couple. They finish each other's sentences. They know what each other's thinking. And I think the writing and the art in this book works the same way, where it's not one driving the other or the script telling Gabe what to draw as much as you just become this thing where it's so fully in sync right now that, you sort of finish each other's thoughts in the comics as well.
What has been funny for me and revealing in sort of way as for me, Locke and Key, it's some sort of a benchmark in my creator experience, because this is the first book in which I feel I still think I need to keep developing my drawing skills, but my storytelling skills are at a point in which I feel comfortable with the way I'm telling the story. I think the drawings can get better, but the storytelling in Locke and Key is mature enough to give way to the story to evolve by itself. So we've reached this point at the story in which both Joe and I feel like it's the characters and the story that are driving us to move forward. In a way, certain solutions to the plot or to certain sequences came as a natural result of what would happen to these characters as if they were alive. So I remember receiving a year ago, I think, an email from a person that told me that one of the things he liked the most of this book is that after the 4th or 5th page of the book, he forgot he was looking at drawings. And he dived into the story. And for me as a comic artist, that's the best compliment you can possibly receive, because you don't want to see the people looking at your ink display on a page. You want them to get into the story and forget what's going on around and get it deep into the conflict. So,
all right, and as far as all this goes, one last thing. I appreciate you all coming, but even more than that, like I was saying over here, is I appreciate the support of this book. Like, this was a little book that started out, now it's become this thing 4.5 years later, and you've allowed us to now tell this complete story, and I really appreciate all your support on this. So thank you.
Our thanks. Thank you.